Good morning, Ms. Tabashe. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, DCJ.
Yes, are you ready? Are you ready?
Yes, DCJ, I'm ready. DCJ, this morning we have Ms. Rockman, who is a former DG in the Office of the Premier and former MEC for Finance in the Free State Provincial Government. She is here, DCJ, as an implicated party, but has all along indicated that she's quite willing to assist this commission. Her documentation, DCJ, is to be found in Exhibit HH13. There are 4 volumes to HH13. It's volume A, B, C, and then volume D has a supplementary affidavit.
Yes, I see that the one that has a supplementary affidavit is not marked D.
It's HH13, 13.1. I've been corrected by my colleagues.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's the supplementary affidavit that we received day before yesterday.
Has 13.1 been admitted already or not really?
And even 13 has not been admitted,
Yeah,
Chairman.
okay.
So
yes.
we will be relying also on the usual reference bundles that we've been using for all the Estina witnesses. I don't know if you'd like the witness to first make affirmation, which she prefers to do, and then you admit the exhibits into the record, or if you're prepared to do that now before she makes affirmation.
Okay, well, actually, let's try and get her to, let her do the affirmation first. Please administer the affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Elizabeth Cornelia Rockman.
Do you have any objection to making the prescribed affirmation?
No.
Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you will give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, I truly affirm.
I truly affirm.
Maybe before you proceed, Ms. Tabashe, shouldn't her legal representatives place themselves on record?
Mr. Rulofse has done that previously, Chairman, but I think that it's opposite or
Yes.
apposite for him to do so now, because I noticed on the transcript
Yes.
they did not get his name.
Yes.
Right. So I'll
Okay.
give him the opportunity to
Yes.
correct that.
Thank you.
May it please you, DCJ, I am instructed to appear on behalf of Ms. Rockman in this matter on the instruction of Bakwana Burns attorneys.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
My instructing attorney is Mr. Brett Murison from Bakwana Burns attorneys.
Thank you.
Sorry, DCJ. Apparently I must place my full names on record, so I'm Alexander Rulofse, who appears for Ms. Rockman. My surname is spelled Roeloffze. It's
Okay, thank you. Thank
unusual
you.
spelling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ngiyafundisa la DCJ.
I don't know why Mr. Tabashe wants your full names.
Maybe it's because they gave me a supplementary affidavit day before yesterday. Thank you,
Well,
thank you, DCJ.
actually, that reminds me, the transcribers, I suppose, are listening. I previously asked somebody to speak to them to say in the transcript, there is no need for them to write the full names of a person as they appear in the ID all the time when they refer to the person. you look at various transcripts, they've got Advocate Paul Joseph Pretorius. Each time they refer to him, it's Advocate Paul Joseph Pretorius. I mean, it's enough at the beginning as far as counsel is concerned if you have got his or her initials and the surname, and for the rest in the transcript you just refer to Ms. Kabashe or Advocate Kabashe, Advocate Pretorius. In the end, I think that writing all those full names takes a lot of space and increases costs unnecessarily. So transcribers, please don't do that. If it's a witness, at the beginning, when the witness takes the oath or does the affirmation, they give their full names. After that, you don't have to write all their names each time there's a reference to them or each time they give an answer to a question. Okay, all right. Mr. Wash, I think at least that's taken care of now.
Thank you,
So
Chairman.
I don't know if they've been writing your full names as well. Yes.
Chairman, so we go back to the record and the admission of Exhibit HH 13, volumes A, B, and C to the record, and then also Exhibit HH 13, the volume marked 13.1. We ask that those with the particular documents be admitted to the record.
A has got Ms. Rockman's main statement or affidavit, is that right?
That's correct, Chairman.
And annexures B and C contain just annexures, is that right?
To volume A, that's correct.
To volume,
Chairman.
yeah, to her main statement or affidavit. And then HH 13.1 is her supplementary affidavit and annexures to that affidavit.
That's correct, Chairman.
Yes. Okay.
Safe to say that volume A also has the first few annexures. So
Yes,
it's the
yes, no,
statement
no.
with annexures,
Yes.
and then it continues.
Yeah. The liver arch file containing Ms. Rockman's main affidavit or statement and annexures is admitted and will be marked as Exhibit HH13A. There are two other liver arch files. They are to be marked Exhibit HH13B and Exhibit HH13C, respectively. Each of them contains annexures to Ms. Rockman's main statement or affidavit, and those two are admitted as well. And then there is another liver arch file containing Ms. Rockman's supplementary affidavit or statement with certain annexures. It will be marked as Exhibit HH13.1.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes.
Can I proceed?
Yeah, before you proceed, I just want to say something about Ms. Rockman's evidence statement. Ms. Rockman, I have read your main statement. I've had a look at the supplementary statement. The impression I have is that most of the things that you deal with are unlikely to be controversial or are unlikely to be disputed by anybody. of course, there are some which may be disputed. In order to use our time profitably, I don't want us to spend a lot of time on oral evidence that is unlikely to be disputed by anybody. It may be important, but it is there, it's in an affidavit. Whenever I need to look at it, I can look at it. You understand?
Yes.
So, Mr. Bashe will approach your evidence and lead you in a manner that I believe will take account of what I'm saying. A lot of things that are common cause, like somebody wrote a letter to somebody, a bill was passed, a resolution was made. Insofar as those are non-controversial, I don't want us to spend too much time on them.
That's fine.
The areas which I would like oral evidence to focus on are areas which show that there may have been corruption, there may have been non-compliance with procedures, there may have been undue influence, there may have been some of the issues that are covered in the terms of reference in circumstances where that might be in dispute. Now, some witnesses have already given evidence in the commission in relation to the Estina, and Mr. Bashe is aware of some of the areas where somebody might have given evidence that's not consistent with what you are saying. So it may be that we are not going to take too long in terms of oral evidence. That's not necessarily because your evidence is not important. It might just be because a lot of it is unlikely to be disputed or controversial. You understand
Yes,
that?
that's
Okay,
fine.
all right. And obviously your counsel also hears what I'm saying. I can always go and read what you have written here, okay? But there are areas where I'm interested. One of them is the issue of transfer payments and implementing agents. But there are other areas that Mr. Bashe will explore. But I don't expect us to be too long in terms of your oral evidence. Okay, thank you, Mr. Bashe.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Rockman, you have familiarized yourself with the files that are on the witness table.
Yes.
Can you please look at volume A, which has your main statement? And if you turn to page 4 thereof, can you confirm the name that's recorded there and that is your affidavit?
Yes, it is.
And in everything you say, you will always be addressing the chairman. So I may ask the questions, but the responses go to the chairman.
Yes.
If you then go to page 112 of the same file, could you confirm whether that is your signature, confirm the date of signature and the place of signature of what you are saying is your affidavit?
Yes, it is my signature. It was signed on the 13th of August 2019.
And the place of signature?
Bloemfontein.
Thank you. Let's do the same exercise with the supplementary affidavit, which is in file HH 13.1. If you then go to paginated page 1,
Yes.
again, could you confirm that that's your name and that it is your affidavit?
That's correct.
If you turn to page 44 and 45, on page 44, there's a signature. On page 45, the rest of the details appear. Whose signature is reflected on page 44?
That is my That is my signature, and I signed it on the 13th of October in Bloemfontein.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Can we go to just broad introductory questions? I'm going to try and be brief as indicated by the chairman, but the questions I will be asking are actually important. Your current occupation, what do you do right now?
I did not return to the legislature after the elections earlier this year. I am primarily keeping myself busy in the NPO sector, and it felt like I've been working for the Commission preparing the affidavit for the past few months.
In the NPO sector, you said?
Yes,
What's the
non-profit. Non-profit organizations.
Oh, okay, the NGO.
Yeah.
I know it as a different acronym, but thank you, that's fine. When I get to your positions as DG and MEC, I'll talk a little bit about your qualifications for those particular jobs in context. But for current purposes, can I just indicate that you're aware that we're dealing with the Vrede Dairy Project investigation? With regard to this particular project, the questions that we will be asking will relate to these themes. The first theme is whether provision was made by the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development for the payment of 114 million per annum over the 3-year period of the Estina agreement. That's a critical issue because you were both during that 3-year period in the Premier's office, and then you were MEC Finance. You are with me on that theme.
Yes.
I will also then be putting to you matters raised by Mr. Jankelson in his evidence, Roy Jankelson, and by Mr. Muremi, Moses Muremi, whose testimonies have implicated you to a certain extent. I know that you've received Rule 33 notices in this regard. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
In addition, the Commission is interested in the oversight role that the Provincial Treasury played in relation to the transparent, effective, and efficient use of funds, of funds that were allocated to this dairy project, as well as the assets that were acquired on behalf of the so-called beneficiaries. Included in this discussion will be information regarding the accounting treatment of transfer payments, which the chairman has indicated is interested in, and of course of the whole issue surrounding implementing agents. There appears to have been regular non-compliance by the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development with the SCM procedures, that's the supply chain management procedures. Again, that's an area that I would think falls under your remit. I now address you as the former MEC of Treasury. Would that be correct?
Yes.
The other area that we will then deal with very briefly to an extent regards the broader issues that arise under term of reference 1.4, I beg your pardon, 1.1, 1.4, 1.6, and 1.9. And I'm just going to paraphrase what those essentially speak to. These issues really will try and elicit from you your knowledge or observations, if any, with regard to undue benefits that accrued to the Gupta family or Gupta entities, if I might call them that, Gupta-related entities, or any other family or entity, including the facilitation of the unlawful award of tenders, the nature and extent of irregularities, undue enrichment, corruption, and undue influence, if any, in the awarding of contracts, and whether any public official or functionary influenced the awarding of tenders to benefit themselves, their families, or entities in which they held a personal interest. So that is an area that the Commission has been tasked with in terms of our terms of reference. Can I just go through your background very briefly? How long were you employed in the Free State Provincial Government, just in terms of years?
I joined provincial government after the 2009 general elections, initially as the head of monitoring and evaluation in the office of the Premier. Then I was the acting HOD of the Department of Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs for a brief period in 2010, until I was appointed as Director General around September 2010, up to March 2013, when I became a member of the legislature.
Director General in the Premier's office?
Yes.
And then in 2013, March 2013, you were appointed MEC?
Yes, I became a member of the legislature and then subsequently MEC Finance.
Excellent. Your appointment as DG in the Premier's office, were you headhunted for that particular position? Did you apply for it?
No, I applied.
You applied for
Yes.
it. And what do you believe qualified you for that position?
By then, I was the secretary to the legislature for 15 years, between 1994 to 2009. I hold a BA Languages degree and an honours in English from the University of the Free State. I think I was an experienced administrator, though more in the legislative sector than in the executive branch of government. So I think in terms of both skills and experience, I had a good background understanding of the environment and specifically the political interface and administrative interface. It is a particularly challenging environment to be in for any Director General or head of department.
In fact, that's an area of interest for this commission, because one of the recommendations the chairman has to make concerns how well that interface works, because at the end of the day we have three branches of government, and it's whether there's influence that permeates from one to the other that creates this undue influence, corruption, etc. So I will be asking you one or two questions around that. We'll get to that in just a minute. We have been told that the Free State government would regularly hold meetings, lihotla. Did you attend those?
Yes, I did.
Is that one of the areas where this interface between politics and administration would come to the fore?
Yes, it would.
We'll get to it in a minute under a different question. I just want you to flag that. I am also interested in whether you met Mr. Tabete before, Mr. Tabete being the former HOD of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. Did you meet him before you became DG or only when you became DG in the Premier's office?
No, I met him before when he was appointed HOD Rural Development. I think that was in 2011. I think by then I was still head of monitoring and evaluation. So I had met him in that capacity.
What I'm interested in that score, and I suppose it doesn't just apply to Mr. Tabete, but to all HODs, sitting in the Premier's office, as DG in the Premier's office, what was the relationship you expected to have with HODs? And really, I'm trying just to explore whether there was anything untoward. Is there anything the Commission needs to note within the context of making recommendations on how better to manage those relationships?
No, I don't think so. We have what we call, and I think it applies to all provinces, there is the Forum of Heads of Departments, FORD. At national level, it's called FOSAT, where in the province, it's where the DG and all heads of departments meet on a regular basis, basically almost every second week, for coordination purposes, whether it relates to matters of the public service, whether it relates to programs of provincial government, preparation for Lehotla, implementing EXCO resolutions, preparing for EXCO meetings, and so forth. So it is an important forum. It needs to be active and constructive. Many departments would also, for example, Treasury, would present their technical reports, quarterly income and expenditure reports, trends in irregular expenditure, preparations for audit. All of those technical work goes through Ford, and ideally from Ford it will feed into the Executive Council.
So by the time that Mr. Tabete signed the agreement with Estina on the 5th of June 2012, you had met him a number of times.
Yes.
Did he tell you about the deviation that he was either about to embark on in relation to the appointment of an implementing agent for the Vrede Dairy project, or did you hear of it by the way?
Now, when the matter came to EXCO in June 2012, the memo did not indicate that the contract had already been signed. That we only realized after that meeting, when there was a request for the Treasury Committee to convene and find additional funding to allocate to this Vrede Dairy project. It was only then that we realized, but the contract was signed before the EXCO meeting. Not that it had a material impact, because the Executive Council itself had no authority to enter into contracts, but it was about the political support for the project. But it was not disclosed that the contract had already been signed.
But you are saying that in terms of your own rules and conventions, excuse me, there was nothing irregular about Mr. Tabete signing the contract prior to getting approval from EXCO for the implementation of the project.
Mr. Tabete, and at least the Department of Agriculture Rural Development, had been presenting on Mahuma Bumbung's strategies since early 2011, I think. So it wasn't a completely new project. We were not surprised, oh, suddenly here's a project. There was a build-up on how Mahuma Bumbung was introduced as a strategy through the course of 2011. I think we do make reference to quite a number of presentations.
I'm going to take you to those presently, if you don't mind. I really am just trying to set the basic groundwork for your relationship, for understanding your relationship, not just with Mr. Tabete as HOD, but also with other HODs. Because the impression one gets is that quite a lot of power was centralized in the Premier's office. Is that an incorrect impression?
There was more of a perception, but the Premier's office as a coordinating structure for the province, I was trying to put together a list of the number of forums that operated or was coordinated through the office of the Premier. You would have your ICT forum, you would have your security managers, you would have HR, you would have communications. Not every department can have 20, 30 communication people, but if you bring all of them, for example, together, you have a stronger, more efficient structure. So there was a lot of emphasis in 2009, that term of government that came in. It was a lot of emphasis on the introduction of the outcome-based approach to government, the 12 priority areas, and breaking down the silos that government worked in, where the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. So I think a lot of stronger emphasis came on coordination, and a lot of it was perceived as more control than what it might necessarily have been.
Well, you see, I asked the question also in the context of Mr. Tabete's evidence. We know about the letter that you had written centralizing the advice that departments, I beg your pardon, it's really contracts that would be signed by departments, centralizing that with the state law advisors who sat in the Premier's office. You recall that letter that said all contracts should come through the state law advisors in the Premier's office.
I think it was more that no department should enter into contracts committing government without at least clearing it with the state law advisors. There was a lot of contracts that we had discovered that departments were entering into that was not necessarily in the interest of government in various departments. We also had the problem that come audit, the Auditor General would obtain from the state law advisors the database of cases, which will indicate your liability. When he compared that database to what departments were disclosing, it was different stories. So we tried to say, let everyone feed into one database. We tried to strengthen some of the departments who did not have adequate legal capacity. Not all departments had properly, fully fledged legal capacity internally, as was the case with municipalities.
Chairman, just for purposes of the record, those letters are contained in reference file B for Barry, from pages 551 through to 553.
Thank you.
And there's one more at 549 that deal with this particular issue.
Thank you.
But I think that Ms. Rockman has given us a general explanation that includes what happened in respect of these particular letters. What's of interest, Ms. Rockman, in relation to this, which we will again explore a little later, is that when Mr. Tabete signed that agreement on the 5th of June, he had not processed it through the state law advisor's office in the Premier's office. That is correct.
That is correct.
And you are saying it was a directive, but one that could be ignored. I don't know.
Well, it was ignored. Whether it could have been ignored or should have been ignored is a different matter.
But would, under the normal course, would disciplinary steps be taken against an official who failed to comply with a directive from the Premier's office?
Not easily, not at an HOD level, because he would not have signed the contract without at least his MEC, the responsible MEC, knowing that he had entered into the contract. If the MEC did not know that he had entered into the contract, certainly the MEC would have taken action.
Or ought to have taken action?
Ought to have, yes.
We again will come back to that in a bit more detail because, of course, the state law advisors, when they eventually did see this particular contract, found that it was invalid and a new contract was drafted and signed on the 5th and 7th of July. And that really became the operative contract.
Yes.
But again, coming back to what we really are talking about, it's that relationship between the Premier's office and the powers that reside, whether real or perceived, in the Premier's office, and from your particular perspective as the DG, if there's anything in that South Africans need to be wary of or need to be careful about, is really what I'm exploring for purposes of recommendations that the chairman might wish to make.
Going back to whether the directive was required to be complied with or could be ignored, I would have thought that it being a directive, it was required to be complied with, as opposed to if it was just a guideline.
I think that is appropriate.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Then the next question, again in relation to your functions as DG in the Premier's office, is the following. Did you negotiate contracts on behalf of the Premier's office?
No.
If I can just fast forward for 1 sec, as MEC Finance, were you expected to negotiate contracts on behalf of the Premier's office or the Free State government?
No.
I ask this because I'm trying to understand who would have had the competence to deal with that Estina contract, and then thereafter with the FDC contracts. But maybe for current purposes, I should ask this question. Once EXCO has taken a resolution, do HODs take instruction on how to implement that resolution? Or do HODs simply ask for guidance in the implementation of that resolution?
I would think that the HOD is responsible to implement an EXCO resolution within the confines of applicable laws. EXCO cannot say, go buy 10 houses, and an HOD sets off and randomly picks 10 houses and buys them. The procedures must still be followed. So whatever EXCO decides must be done within the prescripts. If it is the PFMA, it is the PFMA. If it's preferential procurement framework, all the applicable legislation must be followed. There was a thing that we used to say, an EXCO decision does not constitute a procurement process. That was the bottom line. Regardless of what EXCO had decided, you still had to follow whatever process if you want to enter into, whether it's a contract, procurement, doesn't matter what.
Staying with EXCO, did the subcommittees of EXCO that existed have decision-making powers? And that's the first question. Maybe I should let you answer that.
They would make recommendations. That would be the clusters that you are referring to. They would make recommendations to EXCO.
Did the Premier preside over any of those subcommittees of EXCO?
Not of the clusters. He was chairing the Treasury Committee. But the Treasury Committee is not part of the clusters. Treasury Committee is Treasury Committee. It's a separate structure with terms of reference. It was chaired by the Premier, and the Deputy Chair was the relevant MEC Finance, and then a few other MECs, HOD Treasury, and so forth.
I find that quite interesting. So maybe you should just elaborate very briefly for us. But then my picture really is a national picture. I can't see the President sitting in and chairing a Treasury Committee. That's what the Minister is supposed to do, and that's what the PFMA expects of the Minister. So if we transpose that illustration to the provincial level, I find it curious that the Premier would be chairing the Treasury Committee. Maybe you just want to explain to us why that would have fitted with the provisions of the PFMA and any other legislative prescripts that are relevant.
That is how the memorandum was brought to EXCO, to say that was when I was DG, my predecessor. I presume that in the consultation with National Treasury, remember at that stage, Section 100A had been implemented. So this was the Treasury Committee set up around somewhere in 2011. I think July, August 2011. That is, previously the terms of reference was not formalized. It was then formalized like that. But in practice, the practical budget preparations and so forth was centered around Treasury Committee members, but it was extended to be more consultative. We included, for example, some of the district mayors, the metro mayor, other MECs, other HODs. It became a broader task team than the few people that were in the terms of reference as the task team. But the former Premier practically seldom, if ever, actually chaired a Treasury Committee meeting.
So it was just that in terms of form, he could attend.
Yes.
But most of the time, he in fact did not attend those meetings. I'm really trying to understand where the power lay in influencing decisions, and this is why I ask you the question. But I'm satisfied that you're saying that in reality, this particular premier hardly attended those particular
Yes.
meetings. I note also that as DG in the Premier's office and as MEC of Finance, you held meetings with Mr. Tony Gupta on a number of occasions between November 2012 and 2014. Is my information correct?
I think it starts, the engagement with the Gupta family and associates predates that by far. It starts in July 2010 when the New Age made a presentation to the Executive Council to get support for advertisements. So between 2010 to almost 2013, my engagements was mostly with Mr. Ashok Narayan and Mr. Nazim Hawa. In, I think, August 2011, I was on the way to an EXCO meeting in Bethlehem. It started the afternoon. I was informed that I was to meet people from the New Age.
Who informed you that you were to meet them?
I was called by the Premier
Yes, continue.
to say they were at the meeting, they wanted to meet before the EXCO started.
Yes.
So I don't know who organized the logistics of the meeting. We were then, the purpose of that meeting turned out to be, they presented a proposal where we should enter into a subscription agreement to formalize
For the New Age.
For the New Age. One of the Gupta brothers was present, but unfortunately I cannot remember.
I'm sorry, just repeat that sentence. One of them was what?
One of them was present at
One
that
of the
meeting
Gupta
in
brothers.
Bethlehem.
One of the Gupta
Yes.
brothers, but you
Yes.
can't remember which one.
Can't remember which one.
Okay.
That was August 2011. Then in May 2012, there was the first business
Maybe
breakfast.
before you move away from the August 2011, you say this was a provincial EXCO meeting,
Yes,
which was to be held in Bethlehem.
yes.
You say you don't know who had arranged or had made arrangements for the logistics of the EXCO
Yes.
meeting.
No, for them to be present in Bethlehem.
Or what you don't know is who had arranged or approved that they should be present.
Yes,
But it was the Premier who called you and said you should meet with them before
Yes.
the meeting.
yes.
Okay, all right.
It was,
Thank you.
because the engagement was between EXCO and the Dislabeng local municipality, so it wasn't part of our EXCO meeting. It was also not strange for private people to show up at venues where we had EXCO meetings.
Yes.
It was nothing out of the ordinary.
Can I ask you this question as you pause? So this was a pitch by New Age to the provincial government, not to various individual departments within the provincial government.
Yes, the idea was that Office of the Premier would enter into the subscription agreement on behalf of all departments. Yes.
Was that something the Premier did quite often, enter into particular contracts on behalf of every single department?
Yes, at that time, I think we were moving towards transversal contracts. We, for example, used a media bulk buyer that would buy advertising space in newspapers. The coordination was just easier. Instead of having 11 departments advertising posts in the same week in 11, different newspapers, it was very haphazard. So it seemed to be easier. So yes, it was something that we were moving towards.
So you were continuing to tell us this was really your first exposure to the Gupta family stroke Gupta entities. You are going to continue and
With one
bring
of
us
the
through
with one
to-
of the family itself. I
Yes.
mean the others, Mr. Narayan and so forth, I had met before.
We'll
It
speak
was-
about Mr. Narayan. His name has been mentioned in this commission. We'll come back to him in a minute. Any other engagements with the Gupta family per se, or Gupta-related or associated entities that you can recall?
During May 2012, it was the first business breakfast. Those that were broadcast with, sponsored by, I think it was ESCOM at the time, SABC and so forth. The president attended, President Zuma.
Was this in Bloemfontein?
Yes, it was in Bloemfontein.
Yes, continue.
It was on the 17th of May 2012. I think, again, more than one of the Gupta brothers also was in attendance as well.
Again, this was a function that was linked to the New Age.
Yes, it was those New Age business breakfasts.
Breakfast that we've come to hear about.
Yes.
Continue, that's May 2012.
Yes, and then December 2012, as you would remember, it was the ANC National Conference. So as I left the registration area, I met them coming in. Them again, some of the brothers, they also came to register. So
Yes.
it's not like they were in the environment. It was not like they were not known and no one ever engaged with them. They were there.
In relation to any visits you might have made to Saxonwold, to the residence of the Gupta family, what can you share with the chairman in relation to that?
Some of the first meetings, I only met with Mr. Rajesh Gupta.
And that's he's also known as Tony Gupta.
Yes.
Thank you.
I never had other one-on-one meetings with the other brothers. There was a meeting around April 2013. It was after I had left as DG when I was appointed as MEC Finance. With my appointment, we were already in the budget process. My predecessor had delivered the budget speech. So we proceeded to deal with the budget vote debates. So that was a really busy period. We were owing, there was always outstanding debt of New Age that Office of the Premier was coordinating. So the purpose of that meeting was to say, okay, what are the arrangements now that you are no longer there? So it was just confirmation that whoever will be acting as the DG will continue doing whatever the Premier's office had been doing in any event. And then obviously it was the outstanding payment to Vrede Dairy for the 2012-13 financial year.
They raised that with you?
Yes.
Who in particular? Mr. Tony Rajesh Gupta raised that
Yes.
with you?
Yes.
Yes, continue.
Then thereafter, well, obviously.
Oh, sorry, can we just, I thought you were going to
Yeah.
give us a little more information on the issues he was raising regarding that payment. What was the broad tenor of that discussion? And you say that would have been in April 2013.
Yes.
Can you recall the broad tenor
That we
around
had
the
owed
issues
them,
that were raised?
we had owed them money. There was, I think the first year it was the 84, of which only 30 million had been paid. So it was the balance of the first year's payment. And then it was obviously the financial implication for the 2013-14 financial year.
Could you clarify whether in those discussions you were able to say to Mr. Tony Gupta, we have paid you 30 million. This is our money that you are dispensing on a project that has been selected by us. So the concept of owing money is a difficult concept to grapple with, unless he understood it differently, or I have totally misunderstood the relationship between Estina as an implementing agent and the Free State government / the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development.
Ms. Kabasha, I'm sorry.
Chair.
Please don't forget the question that you have just put. For me, I thought before getting to that point, I thought she would first tell me about that meeting in Bethlehem when they wanted to, that is the Gupta family wanted the provincial government to subscribe to the new age. So can I take you back there? Tell me how that happened, because that probably was the start of what followed in terms of the new age and so on and so on. Maybe it wasn't, but I would like to hear about that meeting.
By August 2011, the New Age had already existed. We were already advertising in the New Age. So the support,
But you had not subscribed yet.
but we had not concluded a subscription agreement.
You were just advertising on
Yes.
an ad hoc basis?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And as far as you know, had there been any formal request from the New Age or the Gupta family that you should advertise maybe a lot in their newspaper, or was the position that each department was aware that there was a new newspaper around, and they would advertise if they so chose, but it was not coordinated?
The July 2010 presentation to EXCO had already agreed in principle to support the New Age.
That is July 2011,
2010,
2010?
yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Also, so there had been a presentation
Yes.
but that's not the Bethlehem meetings, that's
No.
right? Oh, please, I may have missed something. Tell me about that presentation.
The July 2010 presentation, the New Age came to present to the Executive Council to say, we are the New Age. This is our approach. We're a new kid on the block. We want support from government. And EXCO agreed in principle, yes, we are going to support this new daily newspaper. You should remember that in the Free State there is no other English daily newspaper.
Oh, is that so?
Yes.
Yeah, so this was...
This was something.
So the New
something
Age was
new,
going to
yes.
be the only daily
English daily
English newspaper.
Yes.
Other newspapers were weekly or
Yes.
and so
Yes.
on. And would those have been national newspapers, or were there provincial ones that were weekly?
There's a lot of provincial community newspapers that
Yes.
that publish on a weekly basis.
Yes.
And then you have the Volksblad, which is part of the Media 24 group.
Yeah.
But that's an Afrikaans
Yes.
medium newspaper. So
Yes.
I think since the mid-1980s, the Free State has not had an English daily newspaper.
Okay.
So there was a particular niche market that the New Age would operate in.
Yes. So at the 2010 presentation, the provincial executive councils agreed in principle to support them,
Yes.
without specifying details and without formalizing any relationship.
Yes,
At
as
that
and,
stage.
as and when, for example, we would place recruitment ads.
Yes. Okay, all right.
We would definitely also advertise in the New Age.
Yes. At that stage, was there any discussion of how much they desired the provincial government to spend on advertisement with them? There was no
No.
discussion about that.
It was difficult to predict, for example, how many posts you could advertise,
Yes.
what posts became vacant when.
Yes.
It's very difficult to quantify, so it was not
Yes.
formalized into a quantum.
Yes.
Yes.
And then after that, the various departments advertised in the New Age.
Yes, coordinated through Office of the Premier.
Of the Premier.
Everyone would submit their posts, for
Yes.
example.
Okay.
We would consolidate and send it through to the media bulk buyers. They would place the advertisements.
Yes. And in terms of payment, how did it work? Did you get invoiced after advertisement?
Yes, the normal standard procedure, there had to be an order
Yeah.
number,
Yeah,
the invoices would come.
yeah,
I think we worked a lot on interdepartmental claims, where
Yeah.
Premier's office would pay and then we would claim back from relevant
Yes.
departments.
and then the next meeting was the 2011 August one in
Yes.
Bethlehem.
Yes, the subscription agreement proposal was August 2011 in Bethlehem.
Yes. Just tell me more about the content of the discussion in relation to the Gupta family or the New Age delegation and EXCO at that meeting?
I was introduced. The Premier was not part of that discussion. He had actually walked away.
Yes, actually the Premier had said you must meet them before the actual
Yes.
meeting. Did you meet them before
Yes,
the actual?
before.
And what was discussed at that?
They had a
meeting?
draft proposal. It was almost in the format of an agreement. It was on their letterhead only. It didn't have provincial government, so it didn't look like a contract that provincial government would enter into. It was for a specific number of copies of newspapers per day at whatever cover price, whatever they required from us for a certain period of time. What I remember is it seemed that this was something that had been discussed prior or long before, because the initial agreement was dated February. It was somewhere around February.
2011.
Yeah. But it was clear that, look, this is not going to happen because we did not make any budget provision. So for this thing to be brought in, it would be from the next financial year
Yes.
to get ourselves in order. So there was a process of engagement to formalize the agreement itself. We also utilized the state law advisors. They formalized the agreement ultimately.
So the discussion between yourself and them before going into the meeting, the EXCO meeting, was they wanted the provincial government to sign a subscription agreement with them.
Yes.
And that would indicate how many newspapers per day and so on would be bought
Yes.
by the provincial government.
Yes, as well as how would we control the distribution points?
Yes.
How do you manage and monitor that process throughout the various respective government buildings?
Do you have any recollection as to whether in that agreement there was a number of newspaper copies that they had already put in to say provincial government must agree to?
I think it was about 4,000. If
About
I remember correctly, it was
Yeah,
4,000
About
per day.
4,000 a day per
Yeah.
day. Yes. You might have no recollection of how much that would have cost at that time. That can be checked.
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't know.
So what was the outcome of your discussion with them before going to into the EXCO meeting?
it would have to be further pursued.
Yes.
Because for that quantum, we would want something in return. And our demand was always find a way to accommodate young people in skills development.
Yes.
So we wanted them to offer a number of students training or support through bursaries and so forth.
Yes.
We would also have to follow some kind of procurement process as well.
Yes.
Clearly, you would not advertise a tender because who else was going to tender you on specific newspapers? So the procurement process in itself would have been a deviation, but that still had to be drafted. It's not like it was ready and available. It also became clear this was a standard pitch made to many provinces. It was not only the Free State. Other provinces were also considering various types of subscription agreements. They obviously varied according to the size and whatever requirements and demands.
So in terms of the outcome of the meeting you had with them, was there still going to be a need for them to make a presentation to the EXCO meeting?
No.
There was going to be no need.
No, they were not invited to attend the EXCO meeting itself. It was only to have this discussion on the proposed subscription agreement.
So they'd come to have a meeting actually with you,
Yes,
not with EXCO?
yes.
Okay. So no final agreement was reached. All that was reached was the issue would need to be pursued.
Yes, I think we agreed in principle.
Agreed in principle, but the details would have to follow later.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Basha.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one or two issues arising from your discussion with the Chairman. You indicated that the initial agreement that they showed you when you met them was dated February 2014. 2011.
Yes.
But you don't know who might have had discussions with them, which discussions would have informed that draft.
No.
You never did find
No.
out. The second question relates to the comment you've just made about the procurement for that subscription. You said that that process would have been a deviation.
Yes.
Explain that. Why would it have been a deviation?
Because it would be impractical to get 3 quotations. Because you want a subscription agreement with a specific newspaper. We were not entering in, it was not a public call for anyone who wants to come to us. We have money to throw at newspaper subscriptions. It wasn't that. It was a specific proposal based on a very specific niche market. That's where the English daily newspaper comes in. Free State would have a specific page. All of those things would still play, would be in play. So you wouldn't get quotations for this specific subscription agreement. There was sufficient grounds for us to deviate.
I'd like just to debate that with you for a minute. Would it not have been in the Free State government's interest to approach any other English dailies that do not have newspapers in the Free State and say to them, we've had a bid. I don't know how this is done. I've never had to do this personally. But essentially, just to indicate that you've got a proposal and you'd like to get value for money, as much value for money as you can, by looking at other competitors if they have an interest in the same product or service. I don't know if you're understanding the question. Was there no reason to look for anybody else and try and make sure that you were getting value for money in relation to the product that New Age was selling to you?
There was no one else available. The last English daily newspaper in the Free State closed down in the mid-80s. It was called The Vrede. I think, I speak under correction, it might have been part of what by then was Independent Media Group, or I don't know who owned it, but there was no one else in the space. It's not easy or cheap to open a newspaper. I think the fact that our community newspapers has not been able to make the transition in terms of schedule to go from a weekly to a daily newspaper, it's indicative. It's a very challenging industry. It's very cash intensive, needs a lot of capital outlay, which is just simply beyond the capacity of what the average community newspaper would have.
So in effect, you really did not even do the research. You didn't go beyond the pitch that was made to you.
I think we had done the research in respect of the rest of our media strategy. So we already knew. There was no one else who was going to offer to open a newspaper in the Free State, a daily newspaper, an English daily newspaper in the Free State. They were also not going to be Free State based, but at least we would have a dedicated page of Free State news, which would be significantly different than what any other English daily newspaper would be offering.
The essence of your answer is you applied your mind to the possibilities and the probabilities and the practicalities. You looked at your SCM procedures and took a decision on the basis of what you had before you.
Yes.
Well, let's look at that again. And maybe what I'm going to ask you has something to do with something that I've asked some of the witnesses when we talk about deviations from procurement. What is it that the provincial government needed to buy an English newspaper for? Why did you need to buy newspapers as a provincial government?
I think the media environment specifically needed for us to have an appropriate approach to a provincial communication strategy. It wasn't only based on newspapers. It had your electronic media, it had community radio stations. It was a much broader strategy. So getting access to an English daily newspaper strengthened our ability to communicate with communities beyond what was available in the space at the time. Your community newspapers, which was English-based, the volume they produce is obviously limited. Their distribution area is also more limited. Your Afrikaans daily newspaper would be limited in the audience that you reach. So there was a number of factors that informed the specific decision. It was also not only on newspaper subscription. It was the new age, but we also had other agreements for other proposals, like a special publication, for example, with Mail and Guardian, that was pursued. There was other agreements with ETV, with SABC. So there was really a lot of elements to the overall communication strategy. It wasn't that New Age was singled out above all others, but it addressed a specific demand that we identified within the environment.
Well, I would have thought that when the New Age made an approach to the provincial government, the provincial government would have taken the attitude that, these are business people, they want to do business with us, they're in business, but we have to ask ourselves the question, why do we need it? And who can give us the best value for the best price? Now, if you say here, you said that they wanted you to subscribe to 4,000, to buying 4,000 copies per day. Is that the number that you ultimately agreed upon, as far as you recall? You
I
can't
don't recall, yeah.
But was it in thousands?
Yes.
It was in thousands.
Yes, it was.
I think somebody will need to check what that cost at that time, at whatever price at that time. But let's stay with 4,000 for argument's sake. That's quite a lot of newspapers per day. That means over 5 days, that's 20,000. That's quite a lot. Now, my understanding of what you were saying earlier on about advertisements is that there wouldn't be, from a provincial government, there wouldn't be too many advertisements. Did I understand you correctly? In other words, there would be some advertisements sometimes, there would be no advertisements sometimes, and certainly at a certain stage it was not coordinated, as I understand it. Later on it may have been coordinated, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
The advertisements was as and when required.
Yes. So if you bought these newspaper copies, what was going to happen with them? Were you going to distribute them among the staff in various departments?
Yes, there was a number of distribution points. Provincial government buildings primarily, as well as Mangung Metro. I can't remember the details of all the distribution points, but it was quite structured to say this many goes to building A, building B, building C. We had people in the different buildings that would monitor proper distribution. And obviously it would be free of charge for officials, general public, whoever walks in would take a copy.
Now, the arrangement you mentioned about a page, in terms of the agreement with them that the provincial government ultimately had with them, was there a page that was dedicated for use by the provincial government?
Yes, it was dedicated to Free State news. It would not necessarily be only provincial government news. I mean, if provincial government doesn't have any news for a specific day, they would fill the page with Free State news, whether it was sport, private sector, doesn't matter what. But it wasn't unique to the Free State. Most provinces had dedicated pages.
With the new age?
Yes.
Yes, but I'm trying to understand what it was used for. Let's talk about the Free State. Why did the provincial government need a dedicated page for themselves?
Information about your government programs, whether it was a specific project, Operations La Sela, whether it was human settlements, whether it was transport month, public service month, audit outcomes, any news that's generated by provincial government to strengthen government's ability to communicate in a better way or to get more access to information. If there was a slow period, it would be either municipalities could contribute, universities, whatever was in the news or what is newsworthy for the Free State would be on our page.
But that insofar as it needed to be, insofar as it was information that needed to be known by government employees, that would have been easy for the government to do without a newspaper, isn't it, in terms of circulars and so on? Is that not so? Whenever there's anything that government needs to convey to its employees, I would imagine they would issue circulars and so on.
Yes, it would not be your internal government type communication that would be sent to officials. And obviously, any newspaper relies on the fact that the person who buys or the person who takes the copy, he takes it home, there's 3, 4, 5 other people who have access to it, who also read. It's the same principle.
So other than that page where the provincial government may communicate certain things, what other need was there for the subscription by the provincial government as you saw it?
It was general support.
Support to
Yes.
to the Kota family, the new age.
To the new age.
To the new age.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if you want to take that further.
Not at this point, Chairman, simply because it's 11:15 and tea time gives us the opportunity to reflect on some of these questions.
Okay, all right. Let's take the tea adjournment and we'll resume at 11:30. We adjourn.
All rise.
Yes, Mr. Basha, do you have any follow-up questions on that issue?
Chairman, I just want to talk a little bit about that subscription
Yes.
agreement, not necessarily follow up to the questions you were asking,
Yes.
but it's in relation to the same agreement, subscription agreement. When was that subscription agreement eventually signed between the department, the Premier's office and New Age? Do you recall?
Chairperson, it would have been somewhere after that meeting, but before the start of the next financial year, before April 2012. I can't remember the exact date. I'm sure we can establish it.
So it would have been before April 2012 in any event.
Yes.
The budgeting process for that line item would have been put into which financial year?
It would, if it starts from April 2012-13, it would be from that financial year starting 1st April 2012.
So it would be in the 2012-2013 financial year?
Yes.
Do you recall the term of that contract? How many years did you subscribe?
Chair, that would be the standard term of contract, 3 years.
3.
Yes.
So it was a three-year term. Then the last question on that is, were you aware of any other provincial governments or state entities or national government departments that had signed similar subscription agreements with the New Age?
Chairperson, at the time we were informed, I think, that the same type of proposal was made, I think, to KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga. Whether they had signed, I am not aware, and I don't know about national departments or SOEs.
But as far as you were aware, you were not the first to sign up for this particular service.
We were not the only ones which received the proposal. I would not want to go as far as saying that we were not the first to sign up.
Can you just describe to me that page you say that the Free State government would have in the New Age newspaper? And really all I want to understand is whether the batch that would come to the Free State would have a Free State page in it. The batch that would go to KZN would have a similar page, but it would be a KZN page, or would you find various provincial pages, if I might call them that, in the batch that arrived at the Free State?
Chair, I would speculate, but if I remember correctly, it was each newspaper had a page per province. You would not print a Free State version, a separate KwaZulu-Natal version, a separate Mpumalanga. It would drive up costs enormously. So if I can remember correctly, there was one edition with pages per province.
I see your counsel is nodding his head. He seems to know a lot about this.
I wouldn't know. I can safely say this is not something we had consulted on.
I know, because that's fine. But let's continue.
Are you saying there would be one page in each issue of the New Age on a particular day, every day?
Yes.
And that one page would be used by all provinces which may have had a subscription agreement with the New Age. In other words, if KZN had something, it would go to the same page. If the Free State had something, it would be the same page that would be used. Is that what you're saying, as you understood the position?
Chair, our news would go to the Free State page. KwaZulu-Natal's news would go to KZN page, but all in one newspaper. But New Age also had a team of journalists, full-time journalists in the province. They had offices in the Free State. So those journalists, the stories they did was also on that page.
Yes. I thought what you were saying earlier on was it would have driven the cost too high if the New Age were to have a page for each province with which they had a subscription agreement. Did I misunderstand you?
Yes. The newspaper, say it has 16 pages,
Yeah,
and there are 9 provinces. Maybe
Yeah.
some provinces had half a page, others had a full page.
yes.
But you would not get 9 different editions of one newspaper.
Yes, no,
Yes.
that I understand.
Yes.
In the same edition, would there be a page dedicated to a particular province? Or is the position that there was one page which was shared by the different provinces which had a subscription agreements with the New Age?
I'm not sure how the level to the details of the subscription, how the subscription agreement links to the page specifically, but provision was made for each province to have a dedicated page at least, half a page.
Yeah, so, okay. So, on your understanding, if today's edition of the New Age had 20 pages, there would only be like page 3 or 4. That's for the Free State province.
Yes, Chair.
But would there be another page for example, the KZN province?
Yes.
That's how you understood
Chair.
it? Oh,
Yes.
okay. But are you saying that that page would be used for each province or provincial government to put in whatever message it wanted to convey to the population or whatever story or it wanted to convey? But apart from that, journalists of the New Age would also put in their own stories in relation to the province on the same page.
That's correct, Chair.
So the page was not dedicated to the provincial government exclusively. In other words, it wasn't going to be filled with what the provincial government decided should go into that page only. It would be what the provincial government puts in, but there would be something that the newspaper itself decides to put in.
That's correct, Chair.
It would be both.
Yes.
Okay.
It was definitely broader than provincial government.
It was broader than-
Sometimes
yes.
municipalities would also
Yes.
generate content or have
Yes.
something that they wanted covered. And like I say, New Age journalists themselves, they were obviously not limited to that page.
Yes,
would
yes, they could
appear
write on
if-
other,
if-
yeah,
If it was newsworthy enough, it would compete with the front page, second page, third page, whatever
Yeah.
the priority would be.
yeah.
Yes.
The advertisements that the provincial government would have for jobs, DG, or whatever, if there's a vacancy, would they go into that page, or would they, could they be put elsewhere in other pages? In other words, did this dedicated page mean that your adverts would also go into that page and not anywhere else?
I think that was a layout and design decision. I don't think we had covered that in any way
Yes,
as a preference.
yes.
It might or it might not.
Yes, okay. Now, did the provincial government, in terms of the subscription agreement, pay any particular amount for this page as opposed to the obligation to buy 4,000 or whatever the number was of copies per day?
No, Chair.
There
The expenditure to New Age was as and when we advertised,
yeah,
and the subscription agreement was the subscription agreement. We didn't pay additional amounts for that page.
yes. So So basically, you paid for the copies, 4,000 or whatever the number was per day, and in return, you got a page that you could use for whatever you wanted to write or advertise. And,
Yes,
and when
Chair.
I say advertise, I accept that you are not sure whether you could advertise in other pages or not.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, all right. And you said that the justification for the subscription agreement was basically to give support to the new age. Is that right? Is my
Yes.
understanding correct?
Yes, as a new entrant in
Yes.
the market.
Yes.
It was a new voice. It was speaking to a niche market that no one else covered in the Free State, being the only English daily newspaper.
I had asked you about the term of the contract. You said it was a 3-year subscription contract.
That's correct.
Was it renewed?
Yes, there was a function shift around 2015 where certain of the transversal communication matters, it related to the public information platform and the subscription agreement, was moved from Office of the Premier to Provincial Treasury. It was a function shift, and accordingly the budget also shifted. So after the expiry of the first subscription agreement, a second subscription agreement was entered into between Treasury and New Age. And that one was also the same, 3-year period. Then in 2017-18, there was an instruction note of National Treasury on cost containment measures, which addressed really a broad range of issues, anything from entertainment, telephone data costs. Included in that cost containment measure was then the measure that says subscriptions to newspapers or other publications should, when they run out, they should not be renewed. And we implemented that. So early 2018, I think around March 2018, when that subscription agreement came to an end, that was the end of the relationship. We did not renew.
You said that was end of 2018,
Yes, March 2018.
March 2018.
Yes, yes, Chair.
Is that not when it closed down? I mean, the new age.
I think it
Or
was
was it soon
before
thereafter?
it was before sorry, it was before it closed down. I know we made a final payment to the liquidators. If I can remember one of the
Yes.
spreadsheets that I saw, it was a few months before the New
Yes.
Age closed down.
Yes. And
Chairman, it actually closed down in June
in
2018.
June. Yes. And it may be that I'm trying to remember whether we have been told as to when the Gupta family fled from South Africa. I can't remember whether in Mr. Ajay Gupta's application for leave to cross-examine anybody whether he dealt with that, but we know that they did flee from South Africa.
Yes, but can I ask this question? The paper was called Afro Voice from about 2017, when Mr. Manyu took over and rebranded the New Age. Would the old subscription agreement have carried over to that new company, if I might call it that? Or do you recall if the subscription agreement would have terminated by that time?
I cannot recall.
You can't.
I would have to go back, Chair, and look at that, but I can't recall anything about that. Although I know Mr. Manye himself also made a presentation to the Executive Council after he had taken over the New Age, same principle of requesting support and so forth. But I can't remember the technicalities around whether the subscription agreement had continued or, I'm sorry, I can't
But-
remember.
But again, it would now be Provincial Treasury that would have been in charge
Yes.
of taking a decision
Yes,
on whether to subscribe or not to Afro Voice.
yes,
You can't recall whether you did or did not.
no.
But what you do recall is that you were asked, in terms of that cost containment directive, to cut all the excess things
Yes,
you were doing, and one of them was the buying of newspapers.
yes. It was not only newspapers, it was newspapers and publications. I mean, department subscribed to magazines, professional industry-type magazines, so you would really have to review, do you really need everything? Do you need the quantity of newspapers that you may be subscribing to? It was a quite extensive cost containment measure. It's Instruction Note 3 of 2017-18.
A related question is the following. You had the subscription agreement in place for two terms. During that period, did you continue to advertise and pay separately for any advertisement space that you were taking in the New Age paper?
Chair, I'm sure that would have been the arrangement. Yes.
Again, on that ad hoc basis that you described earlier.
Yes.
Why would advertising in the New Age, even if it was advertising most of the provincial governments in the New Age, why would that not have been enough support to the New Age? Why did you have to go to the extent of subscribing to, I know that I'm using the figure 4,000, but you said you are not sure,
Yeah.
but it was in 2000s. Why did the provincial government have to subscribe to buying every day thousands of copies of this newspaper?
Chair, I think I would speculate, but
Well, you were the DG of the provinces at the time, isn't it? So you can't be speculating.
the advertisement would only, it would be limited support.
Yeah, but
It was
that
not
would be,
predictable.
but that would be the support you can give. I mean, obviously, as a judge, my background is that of a lawyer. When I left practice, a lot of us as black lawyers wanted support from government, but we didn't expect anything other than that if and when there is work that needs a lawyer, then we would be considered. We didn't even think of, we didn't even ask to be guaranteed, just that we would be considered. So in other words, you have work to be done. You need a lawyer. Therefore, you give support to categories of people that might deserve special support. So I don't understand why it was necessary to go beyond just saying, okay, the way we can support you is consider giving you more adverts than even most adverts compared to others, if that is justified. But to say we'll subscribe to thousands of copies per day seems to me to be on the excessive side. I may be missing something, and you must help me if I'm missing something.
Yeah, I think, Jay, if you go back to the context of that time, I can remember clearly out of ANC legotlas, out of government legotlas, and I'm talking about both province and national. Government's ability to communicate was extracted as a specific area of concern. So it's not randomly that we decided in the Free State this is the way to go. There was a bigger picture that informed that. I do not deal with this in any of the affidavits, and I'm certainly able to go back and extract those kind of documentation. I think as an entrant, as a new entrant to the market, we know the existing media ownership was skewed to a specific group. I think it was a very particular argument to say, let us do something to promote the diversification of media ownership. I think it should also be seen in that context. It is, I mentioned it before, it is a highly cost-driven industry. So you would not expect any media house to simply cover their costs through advertisements if they do not have some other kind of support that they can rely on. And in this case, it was government providing focused support, whether it's through a subscription agreement, whether it's through advertisements, to a specific new player in the market.
Well, I think we have had evidence of how much was spent by the provincial government or maybe the Premier's office on the new age at a certain time. We did have that evidence, and Mr. Manyi did deal with it. But I think, yeah, we did have that evidence. I can't remember the amounts that were involved. But, I mean, if one is talking of 4,000, and again, I accept that that's not the figure that you are sure about. If the new age, a copy was 10 rand, that would be 40,000 rand a day. 5 days, that would be 200,000 rand. In 5 weeks, that would be 1 million. Then one can go on. If it was not 10 rand, it was 5 rand, it would be half of that. But I have this impression that it seems excessive, but I think you have said what you are able to say about that. But if there's something you want to add, you know, feel free to add.
Yeah, if so many documents that to extract it might take some time.
Okay, well, you can
But certainly,
always...
I think I agree with you. The evidence was already in the commission. I think almost it came from the GCIS presentation.
Yes, it
They did
yeah.
outline the expenditure, I think, per province, national departments,
Yes.
and provincial departments.
Yeah,
It is there.
It did, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Then just to tidy up this part of our discussion, you said one of the returns that you indicated to the new age was that they should develop young people. There should be a skills transfer.
Yes.
Did this take place, to your knowledge?
I know in the time that I was still DG, there was a recruitment process, so a number of young people were nominated, and they had gone to like interviews, skills test type of thing. After I had then left, I don't know what happened to that part of the program. But certainly they started. Or they started to participate in a possible recruitment training type of program.
Would there be a record somewhere of the achievement of that particular objective?
I am not sure whether there would be. We would nominate, and we being broadly, it could be anyone that would forward names. New Age would invite them, they would do the skills test, see who they wanted to develop, who they could develop in terms of potential, whatever. But I don't know that there was ever any formal feedback process.
Even in relation to your media strategy and the work around that, is there no line item somewhere or report somewhere, whether it's in the annual performance plans of the particular department, that is either the Premier's office or later on the Provincial Treasury, where you're saying we achieved this objective, these are the numbers of students that were able to participate in this particular program? alternatively in the SOPA addresses, because I know that as a matter of course, politicians like to say, this is what we actually worked for and achieved. And this is the kind of report I have in mind.
Chair, it may or may not have been. I just don't have that information available at this stage.
Can I then come back to your meeting with Mr. Tony Gupta? One of the things you said he asked about was...
I'm sorry, Mr. Bashir, I just don't want to forget this. Won't somebody check, if nobody has checked, the exact number of copies that of the new age that the provincial government agreed to buy every day? Number one. Number two, won't somebody check what percentage of what the new age sold, of the newspapers they sold in the Free State, was the amount that was bought by government in terms of the prescription? No, was this a situation where, for all intents and purposes, only the provincial government was buying their newspaper? That's what I'm looking for, and hardly anybody bought it, or what the position was, and that can be given to me or to the hearing at some stage in the future.
We will do that, Chairman.
Yeah. Okay.
We are back at the meeting with Mr. Tony Gupta, and one of the things you said that he was concerned about, this is my paraphrasing of what you said, about continuity, because you were now moving from being DG of the Premier's office, in the Premier's office to MEC. The question is, why would he be concerned about an item that had been budgeted for? Was the province not paying timelessly?
Do I understand you correctly as referring to the outstanding debt for the newspaper?
For the newspaper, yes, that's what I'm
Yes.
talking about. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
Yes, Chair, at that stage, because we used the media bulk buying agency, the Office of the Premier would pay the bulk buying agency, who would in turn pay all the relevant newspapers. They developed a problem with the media bulk buying agency, both between the partners and in terms of reconciliation of payments between what we pay to them and what they pay to respective newspapers. So there was a stage where New Age and a number of others were saying we are not paid, and we were saying, but we have paid, we can't double pay. We can't pay the media bulk agency plus pay you then. So it was quite a technical process of reconciliation until we were able to resolve it, but it was ultimately resolved. And in addition, let me be honest, between January and March of any given financial year, you would find it very difficult to get 30-day payments out of most provincial government departments. Most service providers are now equipped to know that in their planning they must know everyone is made to survive in that period, but no one or very few would actually be paid in full, because by then cash runs out. That is the reality.
It's one of the things I've never understood with government. They say they support small businesses and so on. Small businesses are very important for the economy, but they just don't pay them on time. And I think various presidents of the country over the years have made all kinds of promises that this would be fixed, but one continues to hear that it's not done. A lot of businesses go under because government is not paying them.
Yes, Chair, you are correct. It is a problem that bedevils government. But it is about cash management. In your last quarter, you protect salaries, cash for salaries, so that you don't overspend. Inevitably, you run up your accruals and payables. I think in the period 2011-12 to 2017-18, the Free State accruals doubled from 2011-12, I think it was about 1.3 billion. By 2017-18, it stood at 2.6 billion. That is money really owed to people for services rendered, goods rendered, that at year interest had not been paid. But it was,
It's just so
expenditure was
unacceptable. It's just so unacceptable. You know, small businesses of people who are trying to do the best they can, they are asked to do certain jobs, they do the jobs, and then they are not paid for months on end, and it's just so unacceptable. Mr. Bashe, you may proceed. Just that it's one of those things that I think the problem is that public service have a problem about supervising that people do the job that they are employed to do, and that they do it on time and they do it properly. For me, it's a simple thing. Don't ask a small business person or anybody to do a job unless you know you will pay them on time. You may be protecting salaries public servants protect their own salaries, but they forget about the salaries of people who are employed by these business people. And these people complain, and nothing happens. And that's a government that says it cares about poor people.
Well,
Yes.
Chairman, we are here talking about Mr. Tony Gupta complaining about the 84 million
yes.
that they were expecting to receive from the provincial government from the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. But before we deal with that in detail, I just wanted clarity. So one of the discussions with Mr. Tony Gupta at the time concerned payments to the new age.
Yes.
Good. So let's come back to the monies that were due on the Estina agreement. And my question at the time was really a reflection of how my understanding of the contract was that this is a contract. Government is the principal requester of services. Estina has been employed as the implementing agent. Estina has already been given 30 million rand to start certain processes. In April of 2013, which is when this meeting took place, you have Mr. Tony Gupta saying to you, you guys owe us money. You have not given us the 84 million that's outstanding. So my question was, did you engage him just in discussion on two things? One, that it can't be an owing of money because they were at the end of the day implementing services that government had requested. That's one. Second, when you really look at when that contract came into effect, it would have been on the 7th of July, the 12-month period that would trigger the payment of the full 114 had not been reached yet. So why was he concerned? I just want to know if you discussed this, and if you did, what the tenor of those discussions might have been.
I think we did not discuss it at that level that you would be discussing, or you are referring to. It was mostly a discussion, Chair, that this is how the contract was structured. We must pay X amount per financial year. It didn't come into 12 months from this month to that month. It was per financial year. The first 30 million was supposed to go for X, Y, and Z, whether it was land acquisition, whether it was feasibility studies, this, that. What we had discussed more was, there was a report from Provincial Treasury. One of our budget officers had visited the farm in January 2013. And he had raised a number of issues. And he had photos, I think it's somewhere in the supporting documents, that report is there.
Is that the asset management unit report?
I think it was the budget officer, it's the Meiberg report.
Yes.
He was in the Sustainable Resource Management Unit.
Yes.
So a number of issues were raised, and the HOD at the time, HOD Treasury of the time, had also raised concerns to say, look, when this project started, this is what we said should be done. The contracts needed to be reviewed. We wanted X, Y, Z. By January, it seemed that some of the documentation was not provided to Treasury. By April, by the time we were going to meet, it seemed that events had overtaken the January concerns. So I was saying to Mr. Gupta, to Tony Gupta, that regardless of whether there is a payment now, in April, the new budget is, firstly, it's loaded on the system. You don't just open the system on the 2nd of April and everyone starts merrily paying people. It doesn't work that way. It takes time to upload the budget on the system. Then we wait for cash. It's not like National Treasury is either going to dump cash on us on the 1st or the 2nd of April. It's as and when money becomes available. So depending on what cash we have available is how we will process the payments. But more importantly is, Treasury is going to do its own site visit, because there's a lot of noise in this space. So we want to make sure that what you had said is going to be done in the first phase or the first year or the first payment. We need to compare that with what is actually on the ground. And that is what informed the May 2013 site visit, which I went with the whole merry gang of Provincial Treasury, and whoever else wanted to be present was there. They did not have a problem at all with the site visit. They were quite comfortable to say things are in order, there's work in progress on site. We've planted, we've done this, that, the other animals are being bought, delivered, so forth.
Let's take a step back. You were aware that 30 million had already been paid to Estina.
Yes.
Had you seen an accounting for the use of that 30 million?
It would be difficult for me now, Chair, to say when did I see that accounting, because I knew about the Meiberg report after I had become MEC in March. But I had not seen that report, and that report was not necessarily an accounting report. It was also type of a site visit report. So I don't think by April I had seen a report accounting for the funds.
In fact, the Meiberg report criticized the project managers, the implementing agent, for their lack of progress. My colleague is just trying to find that particular document. But they certainly made various points where they distinctly identified the lack of value for money for what had already been dispersed as one of the key areas that Treasury would have to look at. But we'll come back to that particular document as soon as we find it. But I know exactly which document you're talking about and which particular visit, and those were their conclusions. My question really is, in your discussions with Mr. Gupta, was there an obligation that rested on you, that oversight obligation, to say to him, show me, even if it's in document form, what you say you have done with the first 30 million that we have given to you as an advance payment. And then we can properly assess whether the 84 is due now or at a later stage. I would have thought that that's the type of discussion because you're trying to bargain and buy time, knowing you do not have those funds in your account. And I would have thought that would be the type of discussion you would be having with him.
No, not at that technical level, no.
Can I also say that there's a bit of a dispute around what that first 30 million was intended to do. On Estina's version, that 30 million, they took 29 million of that and sent it out of the country. Ostensibly, they were reserving parlor milking machinery. Then eventually, the last 1 million that was left, they also reserved for other purposes. Mr. Tabete's view of what ought to have happened to the first 30 million was that it ought to have paid for the feasibility study, for the EIA study, for the planning that needed to be done, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a bit of a disjuncture between Estina and Mr. Tabete with regard to what that first 30 million ought to have been doing. Hence my interest in whether you had a discussion with him about why they were asking for more money when they had hardly finished phase 1, which the 30 million was supposed to take care of on Mr. Tabete's version. I don't know if you're aware of that disjuncture between what Estina thought the money they could do with the first 30 million and what Mr. Tabete believed they were supposed to have done with the first 30 million.
Thanks, Chair. We are stuck with what is presented to Treasury by Agriculture Rural Development. We had no relationship with Estina, so whatever happened between Estina and Agriculture is between them. Mr. Tabete was the accounting officer. He had to be comfortable that conditions had been met, the accounting treatment was in order. Ours was more a cash management and the oversight part. So we would not necessarily know those level of details. What was that 30 million for, except for what Agriculture put in front of Treasury?
And is what they put in front of Treasury in accordance with what Mr. Bash has just stated as having been Mr. Tabete's evidence?
Chair, from what I could construct out of the correspondence at the time, because this was now before I became MEC in March 2013, what Advocate Kabashi has put on record to say it was supposed to pay for feasibility study, environmental impact, this, that, that is in Treasury's records. That is what is reflected.
Okay.
And that would be correct because there is a letter dated the 18th of January 2013, signed by Mr. Tabete, which says these phase 1, these were the milestones, they have been achieved. Therefore, we are asking you to release further funds.
Yes.
To this particular implementing agent.
Yes, Chair.
But can we move beyond that to some of the other meetings that you had with Mr. Gupta? And the essential question, because we're really interested in Estina, is were there any other meetings you held with him where the purpose of the meeting was to discuss matters relating to Estina? And the Vrede dairy farm, of course.
I think in between there were numerous other TNA breakfasts running into people here, there. But focused discussions on this Estina, there was a specific discussion after there were quite a number of media reports about cows dying on the farm. I think this was somewhere in 2014, early 2014. And we raised specific concerns to say, you can't be spending this amount of money And we have cows, in the media it says cows are dying on the farm. Then we were provided by agriculture, by...
Before you go there, who did you have those discussions with? Who did you express those concerns to?
Firstly, Mr. Tabeti himself.
Yes.
And then there was a meeting with Mr. Tony Gupta, and Ashok Narayan was present, where we said, look, this is just not on.
And would these meetings have taken place at number 5 Saxonville?
That one specifically, yes. The February 2014, around there. I'm not sure about exact dates, Jay.
Yes.
Then we were provided with that email correspondence from the SPCA that said they had done an on-site inspection, there are no causes for concern. So it is two completely different sets of information you get, that in the one hand the media is reporting cows are dying. On the other hand, here's an email from the SPCA saying there's no cause for concern. You didn't really know which version do you believe. Are these even our cows that are busy dying all over the project? I can up to today not say to you, yes, it was our cows, no, it was not our cows, because it seemed there's also a difference of opinion whether the cows were probably branded. It did not seem, now I'm talking about information we got to know after the Public Protector's report initially came out. This is much later than at the start of the project. That it appeared that the cows was never properly branded or tagged when they first arrived, those that seem to have been bought and delivered. So there was a lot of inconsistencies, uncertainties, which we also later picked up in audit when there was a reluctance from the department to disclose the assets as part of work in progress in their asset records. That we deal with extensively in the audit and accounting treatment part. So it was clear that we had a feeling things were not going that well, but after the May 2013 site visit, at that time it seemed that the project had started. Fields had been planted with, I presume, maize or whatever it is that cows eat. I'm not an agricultural person. The first infrastructure developments had started. It looked like a project in progress. There was nothing alarming in May 2013 that said, we need to stop, we need to reassess. It seemed that things were as it should be with a project as it begins to be implemented.
So you are here still explaining some of the meetings you held with Mr. Tony Gupta,
Yes.
and you say that would have been one of the more critical meetings you held with him to discuss what was going on at the farm.
Yes.
And that meeting you held before you went on a site visit. You personally went on a site visit.
Yes, it was March 2013, and then the last reference I made, this is around February 2014, that's about a year later. Then in between around, I think it was September 2013, there was also a request that we assist a student from India who had interest in enrolling for a master's degree at University of the Free State, but it was completely unrelated to Estina. And that was just a matter of, we handed it over to the Department of Health to say, please advise, but I don't think it went anywhere because the student had not qualified already. He was still set to qualify, then he would have had to go through the processes of writing the medical board, examination, and so forth and so forth. It was a long process. But that was just a request. It was not linked to any other thing.
Some of the other meetings, I have a list of roughly about 14 meetings. Oh, no, 20 meetings that my colleague has noted for us that you are said to have attended. And my real interest is in the Estina Vrede connection. Are the ones you've told us about, those meetings, are they the only ones you can recall attending with Tony Gupta that dealt with the Vrede dairy project?
I think there was subsequently in April 2014, there was also a meeting. Same story, start of a new financial year and so forth, until the termination of the decision to terminate. I think there was quite a number of meetings that was planned that never took place. There were 2 or 3 meetings which was cancelled at a very last minute, to the extent that I had already arrived at Saxonwold. I was dropped by my protectors, and I was told, sorry, something came up, the meeting is not happening. And we had to leave, and we would leave again. So there was quite a few of them, 2, 3 of those type of meetings. A number of others would have been planned, didn't happen. Either I was not available, or he was not available, or someone got sick, something like that.
Did the Premier know that you were meeting with Mr. Tony Gupta? I really, the difficulty is, in part, you were meeting with him as DG in the Premier's office, so it's really that reporting line. Would he know that you were doing so?
Yes.
On the other hand, as an MEC, you were meeting with Mr. Tony Gupta. Again, just the reporting, I'm just trying to understand the reporting structures or relationships, and just how informed the Premier would have been about what was going right or wrong with one of his mega projects.
Well, as DG, he would have known about the TNA, those meetings, he would have known. As MEC, I'm sure he would have known, but we never attended a meeting together with Mr. Gupta or Mr. Zwane and the Premier.
Did you attend any meeting with Mr. Gupta and Mr. Peter Tabete?
Not that I can remember.
Would you have attended a meeting with Mr. Tony Gupta and Ms. Pati Dlamini, the CFO?
No.
The other persons who are reputed to have been at those meetings, not all of them, some of them, are a Mr. Ashu Chawla of Sahara Computers. Do you know about him, who he is?
No,
Did you
Chair.
have a meeting with him?
No, Chair.
So, no, not Chawla. Chawla, C-H-A-W-L-A, Chairman. Then the other one is Mr. Evan Tuck. Tuck spelled T-A-K, is also reputed, also of Sahara Computers, also reputed to have attended meetings.
No, Chair.
It would appear those meetings might have had something to do with computers that the Premier's office is, again, reputed to have bought from Sunbay Trading, Pty Limited, which is one of the associate companies of Sahara Computer. You don't know anything about those meetings?
Not about meetings. I know that when I was DG, Office of the Premier did buy laptops. I can't remember the purpose for it. At one stage it was either intervention unit or community development workers. The others may have been laptops for students, but I don't have those details. But I did not have meetings with the names you have mentioned, no, Chair.
What about Mr. Kamal Vasram? Would you have had meetings with him? He, remember, was the sole director of Estina when the agreements with DARD were signed.
Chairperson, I may have met him, but I have no recollection of ever being in a meeting discussing Estina with him.
He is also, or was also, a director of the same Sunbay Trading, Pty Limited, which is why we had an interest in finding out what his relationship in that case would have been with you. You have no clue at all, never met him.
No recollection, no.
So what is your recollection of the number of meetings that you had with Mr. Gupta in relation to Estina or Vrede Fund?
I would imagine, Chair, around 4 or 5.
Around 4 or 5?
Yeah, over the period.
Yes. What was the venue or were the venues of those meetings, if you can remember?
Some were at Sahara Computers, some were at Saxonwold, some were, leave the Bloemfontein, that would have been not directly related to Estina, but
Yes.
mostly between those two.
Yes. So, is my understanding correct that those that related to Estina or Vrede Farm either happened in their company, that is the Gupta Company Sahara, or in their home?
Yes.
Is that
Yes,
right? In Johannesburg?
Yes.
And you had to travel from the Free State to Johannesburg for that purpose?
Mostly we tried to have the meetings if I was already in Gauteng for any other business, whether it was meetings, any other kinds of meetings that I would be already here. It would not be a specific trip.
So it wasn't a situation where arrangements were made for you to come for that meeting only?
No, no, Chair.
Yes. But from what you say, it looks like they never held meetings in your office about Estina.
We had no direct relationship as Treasury with Estina, so the engagement in the offices would have been with Agriculture, Rural Development.
But why would they discuss Estina anyway with you then, instead of discussing with the Rural Development Department?
Purely from having the funding available in terms of the budget.
Okay.
Can I ask you about the November 2010 Diwali celebration that was held by the Guptas? Were you invited to that? So it would have been in November 2010.
I don't think I was invited, no, but I didn't attend either, Chair.
You don't recall
No.
attending a Diwali
No.
celebration in November 2010. Then the next one is the Gupta family wedding at Sun City in 2013. Were you invited to that wedding?
I was invited, but I did not attend.
But you did not attend. Can you just, if you are able to assist the chairman in understanding whether all HODs or all MECs would be invited to a function of that nature, or whether specific people would be targeted as invited guests? In other words, why did you get lucky and get an invitation? I don't know if you can answer the question.
Chair, I wonder. The wedding invitation, I took it as one of those courtesy type of invitation. You invite people to certain events because you work with them, but you don't really expect them to turn up. I took it that it's that type of invitation, and it's an invitation. It's not like it's compulsory to actually go. You decide you go or you don't go. I decided not to go. But I can't say that there was a strategy to say invite this one, that one, the other one. I don't know. I don't know what informed who got invited and who didn't.
Do you know of any other of your colleagues who were invited and who did attend?
I think MEC Zwane at the time was invited. I think Achurita Betty was invited. I'm sure the Premier was invited. I'm not sure about others.
And you know if they attended?
I'm under the impression that MEC Zwane and Mr. Tabeti may have attended. I doubt whether the Premier has attended. I have no recollection, but I don't think he attended.
You know, what we have found interesting is that wedding was hosted between the 28th and the 30th of April, 2013. You visited Saxonwold to discuss the payment of outstanding monies with Mr. Gupta in April of 2013. Payment was made in 3 tranches payment of the 84 million that was outstanding was made in 3 tranches. On the 18th of April, 2013, on the 26th of April, 2013, and the 3rd of May, 2013. And of course, speculation out there, and certainly from some of our witnesses, is that this money was not used for Estina / the Vrede Dairy project. It was used for the wedding. Did you have any idea as to what these monies that you were paying in April and in May would be used for?
We would only know what Agriculture had presented to Treasury in terms of the submission. The 3 payments would have been made in accordance to how cash was available. They would obviously have preferred probably 1 payment for the whole amount, and we would have said to them, it depends. As and when cash becomes available, that is how we can pay, but we would not go into overdraft this early in a financial year to enable a payment to be made. But we would be limited to what Agriculture tells us, to say they need X amount, they must pay for A, B, C, D, E. We would not have had any other information.
That's a fair comment, because we are in the process of taking Mr. Tabete through the monthly and quarterly reports of Estina on the Vrede Dairy project. And I'm sure the chairman will be pursuing some of these questions with him, because he had a look at what they reported on. Can we briefly deal with Mr. Ashok Narayan? Now, you met him long before he became economic advisor to the Premier.
That's correct, Chair.
You would have met him, what, in 2010, 2011?
I would imagine around 2010.
And at that time, who was he representing in relation to the matters you were discussing?
I had always associated him with the New Age.
Did you at any point associate him with Estina?
I think I did, yes. I think it's fair to say that was the inference. It was not only, when I started knowing him, it was in relation to our dealings with the New Age.
Yes.
But as it started evolving into the Mubung strategy and so on, I also realized that he was assisting Mr. Tabete in some way. I'm not able to say by when, but yes.
Now, the appointment of Mr. Narayan took effect on the 1st of March 2012. There's a letter signed by the Premier to that effect. Your engagements with him, not just on New Age, but also on Estina, would have preceded the 1st of March?
I don't think on Estina.
One of the issues that really arises in relation to Mr. Narayan is that he appears to have been wearing both an Estina hat and an economic advisor to the Premier hat when he dealt with matters relating to the dairy farm. Would that have been your observation as well, just reflecting back on your engagements with him?
Because I had known him from before the time of his appointment to the Advisory Council, and I hear you say there was a letter from the Premier of a certain date. That council was announced during the budget vote speech of the Premier.
Date?
It was slightly after, it's not the 1st of March, but it was in March 2012. I do address it somewhere in the affidavit.
There's a 16th of February 2012 SOPA address that I think that might be the one that you're referring. No, it must have been after. It must have been after that, because I know as a fact that his appointment took effect on the 1st of March 2012.
The advisory council was announced during the budget vote speech of the Premier on the 29th of March 2012.
Excellent. That helps. Mr. Narayan accompanied Mr. Tabete to India. There is a memorandum that he submitted to the Premier requesting leave to go. Mr. Tabete wrote to the Premier requesting leave to go to India. And Mr. Narayan was going to accompany him. Because at that time you were still DG in the Premier's office, were you aware of that submission?
No, Chair, I wasn't.
So not all submissions from HODs to the Premier would have come past your desk?
No, unless they wanted the DG to recommend something to the Premier, they could write directly to the Premier.
In that motivation, which, Chairman, for record purposes, you will find at HH reference bundle D for Donald, at page 1323.
Page 1323.
23.
Okay.
Estina reference 1323.
Okay.
A couple of issues arose in relation to the submission, and I really just ask for a view from you because you worked in the Premier's office at the time. The first thing the Chairman took up with Mr. Tabete was what was reflected in paragraph 2.1. So I don't know if you want to find, I can read this to you, otherwise if you want to find reference bundle D, and it will be page 1323. But essentially what, I want it to be convenient to you. What would you prefer?
I would rather listen. You can read, please. Thanks.
Okay. What's written here at 2.1 is the following. Provincial Treasury received the final preliminary allocation letter from National Treasury on the 12th of December 2011. An amount of 1 million in 2012-2013, 0.837 million, that's 873,000. I presume we were battling a bit with those numbers, but I think we can take it, it's 873,000 in 2013-14 and 873,000 in 2014-15 has been allocated additional to your baseline to cover carry-through costs on improvement in conditions of service. And it's that last line that's important. To cover carry-through costs on improvement in conditions of service. And the question from the Chairman at the time was, what would this have to do with the motivation to go to India? The response, if I recall correctly, was, oh, we were able to dip into those funds. They were available. They weren't necessarily firewalled for these carry-through costs, but these were funds that would be available. I must say I didn't quite understand the answer, but I knew that I would have a former DG coming to give evidence. And in that capacity, I don't know if you're able to explain what this might have been about. You would understand baseline to cover carry-through costs.
Yes, Chair, the improvement of conditions of service, you know, is it's a salary adjustment related issue. Now, you would imagine that in your projections you have 10 staff members, you're going to need X amount more depending on how improvement of conditions of service is implemented. So if you lose 2 staff members a year, you don't replace them, there's a technical saving. So that would be the way to say we have funding available that we can shift to accommodate other expenditure. If you did not lose staff members during a year or you increased staff members, it would be very difficult to tap into that funding.
So this really is an indication that there was money allocated for conditions of service, salaries, or whatever that what other things might be entailed under conditions of service. But these funds were lying fallow, they were not being used, and could therefore be shifted in an adjustment or readjustment budget process. Is that the essence of what this might have been about?
It could be, but you also need to look at the phrasing. National Treasury says specifically it's added to your baseline
Yes.
for your carry-through effect.
Yes.
So once you start tampering with that money, it might mess you up in future. So it might be better to leave the money as ring-fenced, because presumably you needed this additional funding to maintain your current staff complement at that time. But it does happen. Departments tap into compensation of employee funds because you can move the funding out of COE, but you can't move money into COE. So in order to technically balance your books, you often tap into your COE funding.
Then,
I'm sorry, Ms. Tabashe. Can you go back to explaining that improvement of conditions of service issue again? Paragraph 2.1 of that memo from Mr. Tabede to the Premier says Provincial Treasury received the final preliminary allocation letter from the National Treasury on the 12th of December, an amount of, here is that 1,000 million that was written. I think we were told we should read it as 1 million. In 2013, 2012, 2013, and 873 million, 873,000 in 2013, 2014, and 873,000 in 2014 has been allocated to your baseline to cover carry-through costs on improvement in conditions of service. Just give me that explanation again, if you.
that's paragraph 2.1.
Chair, it's very difficult to find the relevance of paragraph 2.1 to the rest of the motivation. It just makes reference to there was a preliminary allocation letter from National Treasury.
I think that was my concern, that I didn't see what the relevance of improvement of terms and conditions of service was.
The next paragraph talks to the issue of identify dairy farming and so forth. And then the allocated budget of 17 million for completion of 3 dairy plants. It does not say they have the funding to, I think it's a presumption probably, that what they were trying to suggest is that they have funding available to undertake this trip, but that's not the narrow interpretation of the letter would not suggest that. It does not actually say where are they getting this funding
The
from.
money from.
Yes.
Yes. And yet it was supposed to be a letter to do exactly that, isn't it? To provide motivation.
The Premier at the time would approve the principle of the trip. He would not necessarily approve the expenditure part of the trip.
Yes.
They would know whether they have the money or do not have the money.
Yes.
But this first paragraph is a bit misplaced in this letter. I also struggle to see the relevance of it.
Yes.
to the
And
trip.
of course, what is strange is that all three signed it without anybody. It's as if they knew what this was about. Only
Yes, there's
we
no-
don't know what it was about.
There's no other comments or
Yes.
notations made, so
Yes.
it's just signed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Then, of course, you note at paragraph 4.1, we've got Mr. Ashok Narayan undertaking the trip with Mr. Tabete. And the issue that arose in relation to that was whether it was correct, stroke prudent, for a department to pay for a third party who did not work for government to undertake a trip of this nature. In essence, the department was paying for Mr. Narayan to go to India. And the questions that were asked of Mr. Tabete was, is this regular? The man is not employed by the Free State government. He is not yet appointed as the economic advisor. Why is it that you would spend departmental money on a stranger? I don't know if you can just clarify what might have been the position in this instance, especially because you ended up working with Mr. Narayan in the Premier's office once he was appointed.
Chair, I would presume that Mr. Narayan was going to accompany Mr. Tabete in his capacity as a member of the Economic Advisory Council. Whether, I note your point that this predates you've mentioned a letter signed by the Premier. But it has happened that third parties or other parties not employed by government, that their expenditure has been paid to participate in international visits.
What's the justification for that?
Exposure, empowerment, it would depend on the purpose of a specific visit to
Now-
be undertaken. I don't know what was the specific purpose of this visit.
This visit was to go and find a strategic partner in India. And Mr. Tabete had done a desktop study and identified Paras and decided he wanted to go and talk to them. He had not selected them, but he wanted to talk to them about the possibility of becoming a strategic partner. So that's the one fact. The second fact is Mr. Zwane has submitted an affidavit to the Commission in which he takes responsibility for suggesting that Mr. Narayan, in particular, accompany Mr. Tabete. Reason being, says Mr. Zwane, he would be able to deal with protocol issues, foreign culture issues, etc., etc. So it was as a convenience to Mr. Tabete. But the question remains, are these justifiable reasons for using taxpayers' money to pay for somebody who, from his own profile, Mr. Narayan's own profile, is quite capable of paying for himself to go to India and come back to South Africa?
Chair, I think it would depend on whether he had his own agenda to pursue in India. If he was only going on the request of provincial government, then it might have been reasonable to presume provincial government would pay for him. If he had his own interests that he was going to pursue, he should certainly have paid his own expenditure.
There's a matter I'm going to be taking up with you later relating to the municipal manager of Phumelele local municipality, Mr. Muremi. But part of that discussion I want to extract now and use now, because Mr. Muremi says that when the Indian delegation arrived at Vrede to speak with him, one of the members of that Indian delegation representing Estina was Mr. Narayan. So we here have Mr. Narayan, the same Ashok Narayan, representing Estina in discussions with the Phumelele local municipality. We have the same Mr. Narayan being paid for by government to accompany Mr. Tabete to India. The question must arise, which hat does he wear and how do you determine which hat he is wearing at any particular point in time? I don't know if you can throw light on this question.
No, Chair, it would be difficult to make such a crisp distinction. For all intents and purposes, he was announced as a member of that Economic Advisory Council, so the expectation was that that is the capacity he would act in. It would be very challenging to manage interests if we also then say, but he was representing Estina. I cannot remember at that time that he was said to be representing Estina. I was not part of meetings in Pumalela, so I would not have that perspective that Mr. Muremi would have.
No, in fact, that is Mr. Muremi's evidence, that Mr. Narayan indicated, and even in the negotiations themselves, indicated that he was representing Estina in those negotiations. But that's fine because it's not a matter, as you say, that you can take very much further.
What is your reaction to Mr. Tabete's evidence, if I recall correctly, that Mr. Narayan was needed for protocol purposes to assist with protocol? Are you able to understand that?
Chair, it's difficult. I don't know if Mr. Narayan had any specific protocol training, but certainly he would understand the language.
Yes.
He would understand the culture.
Yes.
But apart from that, I would not be able to comment what
Yeah.
else he could
Yeah.
offer.
Something that maybe I should have raised with Mr. Tabete, but he's coming back. South Africa would have an embassy in India, I would imagine. I think it does have an embassy. There would be an ambassador there. I don't know if there would also be consul generals in different cities and so on. And one would have thought that one of the things an ambassador has to try and understand is the culture of the people in the country where he or she serves and the people that he or she has in the embassy, the staff and people who assist him or her would include maybe advisors and people who understand the culture. And one would think that then if Mr. Tabete needed somebody who would advise him on those things, the embassy in India would have been, the South African embassy would have been best placed to provide him with somebody without incurring the expenses of traveling to India. Is that something you are able to comment on?
Chair, yes, I think India is, we have a High Commission in India, if I'm not mistaken. We
Yes.
are all
Yeah.
part of the Commonwealth, so it's High Commission.
Yes, yes. Is the difference in terminology not
Yeah,
just
yeah, it's-
terminology? The
yes.
substance is the same.
Yes.
And it's an ambassador.
Yes, so there would be capacity in the High Commission to take care of whatever protocol requirements, logistical arrangements and so forth, that would be available. I would not know
Why
of
that was
specific
not?
dynamics that
Yes.
required this,
Yes.
unless it is,
Yes.
I'm just not able to comment further on that.
Yes. Thank you.
When did you first hear about this company called Paras? So would it have been before the EXCO decision of the 13th of June 2013? That's an easy defining point. Would it have been during the Mohuma Mobung discussions, which really would have started around September 2011? So I'm just giving you a time frame that might assist.
I think it must have been around, Chairperson, I think around June 2012. The EXCO submission was June 2012.
On the 13th of June 2012?
Yes.
So you heard about Paras before that or at that meeting?
I can't remember having heard of Paras before that meeting. Before that meeting, it was Vrede. I don't know that it was presented as, with that level of details now, talking about Estina and Paras, and there were quite a number of names that later came in. I think it was only after we got the copy of the agreement that had been signed before that EXCO date that we had seen, okay, there's now a number of other entities that is involved.
Would you know anything at all about the relationship between Estina and Paras?
No, Chair, sorry, nothing.
Did you have any meetings with anybody from Paras?
No, Chair.
Did you come across payments that had to be made specifically to Paras for services rendered to Estina stroke or in relation to the Vrede dairy farm?
No, Chair.
So the only people who would have talked to you about money really and Estina and rather money and the Vrede dairy farm would have been Mr. Tony Gupta, as we've already discussed.
Yes. In terms of budget?
Yes.
Not of expenditure and who they had subcontracted, no.
Correct.
There was not that level of discussion.
Correct. We will, of course, come a little later to the Free State Development Corporation, but I think that's a matter we'll raise with you just after lunch. Chairman, I notice it's just about 1 o'clock. I'm now moving actually to the regulatory framework, and just so that you know where we're moving to now, I'll be putting the testimony of Mr. Jankelson to you, and we'll really be talking about that 114 million, what provision was made for it. That's the area we're now going to be moving to after lunch.
Yes, we'll take the lunch adjournment, but maybe Ms. Rockman, I can just mention this so that maybe during the lunch break you can reflect on it and see whether later on you might be able to enlighten me on. When I read your affidavit, I got the impression that you may have been trying to stay away from accusing anybody of not doing the right things, of not following procedures that were supposed to be followed, and that all you wanted to do is just give us certain information that you can back up with documents, whether it's a resolution or the passing of a bill, adjustment bill or appropriation bill or whatever. What I was expecting from your affidavit statement was something along the lines that, having set out what the role of Provincial Treasury is, then to say, in regard to Estina, here is what was supposed to happen. It was done. Here is what was supposed to happen. It wasn't done, and deal with it in that way. I seemed to struggle to find that. So you might be able later on to enlighten me, but that's what I was expecting. I found that a lot of it was really saying this is the framework, that's the framework, but without connecting it to say, let's look at whether certain things in regard to Estina were done with full compliance with the requirements or with certain procedures. So I just want you to know that that's a concern that I have about one of the concerns I have about your statement, and later on you could enlighten me on it. Okay. We are going to take the lunch adjournment and we'll resume at 2. We adjourn.
All rise.